You ever notice how sometimes the world just barges in, no matter how high you build your walls? That's exactly what happened to me the night a soaking wet little girl came pounding on my door, clutching a teddy bear and begging me to save her mom. It was a hell of a thing. Here I was, Caleb Hayes, billionaire recluse, master of solitude, and suddenly my expensive silence was shattered by a kid's desperate whisper. You know what I mean? Money can buy you a fortress, but it can't keep out a storm, or a little girl named Grace. I'd spent years and a fortune making sure the world stayed on the other side of my mountain. My house was all glass and stone, perched up where the clouds meet the pines. I designed it to keep the noise out, company, family, the past, all of it. But on that particular night, the wind was howling, Gus was growling, and when I heard that frantic knocking, I just knew something had slipped through the cracks. Let me back up a sec. I didn't expect company, ever. Security usually kept people out a mile down the road, but the pounding didn't stop, so I went to the door. When I opened it, there was Grace, barely 9, hair plastered to her face, blue eyes wide as saucers. Please, you have to help. They're hurting my mom. Those words hit harder than any boardroom ambush. Her mom, Eleanor, worked for me, quiet woman, always slipped through my house like a shadow. But right then, Grace was trembling on my porch, soaked to the bone, and there wasn't a security system in the world that could have kept her away. I told her to get inside, handed her off to Gus, and yanked on my old coat, one I hadn't worn since I cared about anything beyond stock prices. The rain was coming sideways, mud pulling at my boots, but I ran toward the staff cottages. Yeah, maybe I looked ridiculous, a billionaire sprinting through a storm, chasing after a little girl's plea, but in that moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was getting to Eleanor. The door to her place was hanging open. Inside, the stench of cheap whiskey and blood hit me like a punch. There was Eleanor, barely breathing, bruised and broken, lying crumpled on the floor. I knelt beside her, and for a second, I thought I'd lost her. But she blinked, saw me, and croaked, "Grace, is my daughter safe?" That about broke me. I scooped her up, she was so light, and carried her back to the main house, the storm raging, my anger building with every step. Back at the house, Grace was waiting, eyes full of hope and terror. I laid Eleanor down in a guest room. Looked more like a queen's suite compared to where she'd come from. Grace curled up next to her, this tiny little protector, while I fumbled through first aid like a giant with 2 left hands. I'm no doctor, but I did what I could. Bandaged Eleanor up, made her safe, and that was when something shifted in me. Maybe it was the kid, maybe it was the way Eleanor thanked me even while she was broken and bleeding, but suddenly, being alone didn't feel like strength anymore. It felt empty. That night, after getting them settled, I called my head of security, David Chin, ex-Fed. The guy you want when things get messy. His name's Rick Peterson, I told him. Find everything there is to know about him. And get here. By morning, a private doctor had checked on Eleanor. Concussion, cracked ribs, but she'd make it. Grace ate cereal at my kitchen counter, swinging her legs and telling me stories about her stray cat, her dead soldier dad, the way Rick started out nice, and then just changed. When David showed up with Rick's file, it was exactly what I expected: dishonorable discharge, assaults, drinking, restraining orders. A garden variety bully. I didn't hesitate. I had the power. I used it. Rick lost his job, his place at the bar, his lease. All of it gone in a phone call. I made sure Eleanor got back pay and set up a trust for Grace. Some might say I was playing God, but I just saw it as cleaning house. But you know, retribution's not as satisfying as you'd think. When I finally faced Rick at the Rusty Nail, a rundown bar at the edge of town, I didn't yell, didn't fight. I just laid it out. Your life here is over. You touch Eleanor or Grace again, and you're finished. He wilted, just like every tough guy does when real power stares them in the face. Back home, Eleanor tried to thank me. She insisted she couldn't stay, that she wasn't a charity case, that she was just the maid. I told her she wasn't anymore. She was my guest. Grace, bless her, piped up, "Are you going to be our new dad?" Right there in front of us. That kid. I laughed for the first time in years, but I told her no, I was just a friend. They stayed a little while. Eleanor healed. Grace ran the halls like the house was a fairy tale. Eventually, I set them up in a cottage in the next town, New job at the library, everything taken care of. Eleanor protested. She wanted to earn her own way. And I get it. She needed to stand on her own, and I respected that. So I stepped back. No more silent guards, no more gifts. The silence was back, but now it felt hollow. Weeks passed. Then one night, a knock at Eleanor's door. Rick again, looking desperate, ruined by his own choices. He broke in, snarling that she owed him. But before he could lay a finger on her, I showed up. Yeah, I'd kept watch. Maybe I lied about not interfering, but I wasn't about to risk their safety for my pride. I didn't have to touch Rick this time. He saw me and ran, and that was the end of him. Eleanor broke down, finally letting herself feel safe. For the first time, she hugged me, really hugged me. That was it, you know? Two broken people, holding on to each other in a busted-up living room, both realizing the world isn't meant to be survived alone. Grace watched us from the hallway, her teddy bear clutched tight. Not scared anymore. That's what real safety looks like, knowing the monsters can't get through the door anymore. And that's where I'll leave it for now. Maybe you're sitting there after a long shift. Maybe you're driving home. Maybe you're just killing time. But I'd love to know what you think. Was it justice, or was it just another rich guy flexing power? Did Eleanor do the right thing standing up for herself? Drop a comment below. Let's hear your take on where the line is between protection and control. And hey, if you want to hear more stories like this, hit like, subscribe. And let's keep the conversation going that you'd think after a night like that, everything would finally settle down. Like you could breathe easy, knowing the nightmare was over. But real life doesn't tie itself up in a neat little bow just because you want it to. For days, maybe even weeks, we all just sort of drifted, trying to figure out what normal was supposed to look like now. Grace bounced back. The quickest kids do. She'd race through that tiny blue cottage, chasing sunlight across the floors, drawing rainbows with her new art set. But for Eleanor, the scars went deeper. She'd startle at every loud noise, tense up whenever someone passed the window. There were nights I'd get a call, just silence at first, then her voice, small and shaken, asking, "Could you talk to Grace?" She had a nightmare. Of course, I'd oblige, sometimes reading her favorite story over the phone, sometimes just sitting there, listening to her breathing slow until she drifted off. More and more, I realized it wasn't just Grace who needed comforting. Funny how quickly you can get used to being needed. I found myself rearranging my days, making excuses to swing by Cedar Creek, dropping off groceries, helping fix a leaky faucet, or, once, showing up with Gus just to watch Grace play in the yard. You know, the mountain felt emptier now, like my fortress wasn't keeping the world out anymore. It was just keeping me in. Eleanor tried so hard to make everything right. She threw herself into her new job at the library, made sure Grace had the best start at her new school, volunteered for every event, every bake sale, every story hour. Folks in town warmed to her, but there was always this edge, like she was bracing for something bad to happen. Or maybe just not believing this peace could really last. I recognized it, that look. I'd seen it in the mirror every morning for years. One afternoon, Grace came running into the library, breathless with excitement, waving a permission slip for a school camping trip. I happened to be there. Yeah, I'd become that guy who hangs around the library just to make sure his people are okay. Grace beamed up at her mom. "Can I go? Please? Miss Turner says you can come as a chaperone." Eleanor hesitated. I saw the fear flash across her face, the memory of what had happened before. But then she looked at Grace, at the way her daughter was finally just being a kid, and she nodded. "Okay, honey, we'll go." That trip changed things for both of them. Out in the woods, with a dozen other kids and parents, Eleanor rediscovered her strength. She was the one who soothed a homesick little girl, who made the best s'mores, who kept the fire burning through the night. When a raccoon tried to steal their food, it was Eleanor who scared it off, laughing, hair a mess, flashlight in hand. For the first time in a long while, I think she saw herself as more than just a survivor. Meanwhile, back in town, I couldn't stop thinking about them, about the life they were building, about the gap it had left in mine. I spent hours wandering my empty house, running my fingers over polished wood and cold marble, hearing only the echo of my own footsteps. Gus would nudge me, looking at the door like he expected us to go somewhere, anywhere that wasn't here. It all came to a head one evening when I found myself parked outside their house, engine idling, just staring at the glow in their kitchen window. I must have sat there for 20 minutes, debating whether to knock or just drive away. In the end, I didn't do either. Grace spotted my car and bolted out the door, barefoot, arms wide, yelling, "Caleb, come see what I drew." I couldn't say no to that. Inside, Eleanor offered me coffee. Her hand still shook, but she smiled. We sat at her kitchen table, the three of us, as Grace showed off her latest masterpiece. And suddenly, the world felt possible. Not easy, not simple, but worth it. That night, as I walked back to my car, Eleanor followed me out onto the porch. She hesitated, then reached out, her hand landing on my arm. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Every time things get good, I start waiting for the other shoe to drop." I nodded. I knew that feeling all too well. "Sometimes the shoe never drops," I said, hoping it was true. "Sometimes you just get to be happy. You both deserve that." She looked up at me, something fragile and hopeful in her eyes. "So do you, Caleb." Maybe she was right. Maybe it was finally time to stop hiding from the world I'd worked so hard to shut out. Maybe the whole point of being strong wasn't to keep everyone at arm's length, but to let someone in, just one person or two, or maybe even a small, messy family. You know, it's funny. The world sees you one way for so long, you start to believe it. But it only takes a knock at the door, a kid's cry for help, or a woman brave enough to try again, to change everything you thought you knew about yourself. So that's where we are now. Not a fairy tale, not a rescue story, but something more complicated and a lot more real. Grace started calling Gus our dog. Eleanor learned to laugh again. And me? I stopped counting the cost of letting people into my life, because the quiet never felt as good as the sound of their voices echoing through my halls. Maybe next week the roof will leak, or the car will break down, or Grace will come home with a scraped knee and a wild story. Life's messy, but for the first time, I'm not running from it. I'm right here living it. Yeah, that happened. Let me ask you, when is it time to let your guard down and trust the world again? Is it after the storm passes? Or do you just decide one day you're done living behind walls? I want to hear what you think. Drop a comment, share your story, tell me, what would you have done in my place? And if this hit home for you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep the conversation going. Your story matters, too.